The thing about running the only human restaurant in the Nexus Station food court is that you get really good at keeping a straight face. Like right now, watching a Vexer warrior, all 7 feet of pure muscle and combat-hardened carapace, cry actual tears while eating what any human child would call a mild chicken curry. By the sacred moons, what manner of chemical warfare is this? The warrior's mandibles quivered as he reached for his 4th glass of milk. Fun fact, it turns out milk is the universal antidote to spice. Who knew? That's just turmeric and a dash of cry powder, friend. I wiped down the counter, trying not to smile too broadly. Pretty standard Earth fare. You should see what we cook when we're actually trying to make something spicy. The Vexer's compound eyes widened in horror. There are stronger variants? Oh yeah, that's basically baby food where I come from, I said, gesturing to the hollow menu floating above the counter. Want to try the vindaloo? He fled so fast his chair tipped over, joining the small collection of furniture casualties my restaurant had claimed this week alone. I really needed to invest in sturdier chairs. Welcome to Morrison's Earth Eats, I said, brushing the crumbs off the counter. The most controversial establishment in the biggest space mall this side of the Orion Arm. I'm Jack Morrison, proud purveyor of humanity's culinary heritage. And apparently, according to at least 3 different galactic regulatory bodies, a potential biochemical terrorist. The Nexus Station food court spans an entire deck, a massive space filled with hundreds of restaurants representing cuisine from across the galaxy. You've got your standard Zentan protein cubes, metamorphic crystalline nutrient formations, and even a decent Jovian gas suspension bar. But my little corner of culinary chaos, it's become something of a tourist attraction, sort of like those places on Earth where people go to eat ghost peppers. Except here, black pepper is considered hardcore. Jack, my favorite dispenser of controlled substances. Speaking of regulars, here comes Ambassador Bloor. He's my best customer and, honestly, the only alien I've met who's developed a genuine appreciation for human food. Being a gelatinous life form probably helps. No taste buds in the traditional sense, just chemical receptors that somehow translate capsaicin into pleasure. Ambassador, the usual, I said, already reaching for the ingredients. Please, that delightful dish you call mac and cheese with the red powder. His translucent form rippled with anticipation. A buffalo mac and cheese it is, I said, starting the water boiling. How's the diplomatic crisis with the Silicon consciousness going? Bloor's form darkened slightly, the equivalent of a frown. Less than optimal, he said. They're still insisting that organic life is inherently inefficient and should be upgraded to digital format. I tried suggesting a cultural exchange, but... He was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance to the food court. 3 figures in pristine white environmental suits were making their way through the lunch crowd, scanning devices held out in front of them like shields. The Galactic Food Safety Administration, right on schedule for their weekly attempt to shut me down. I sighed, sprinkling cayenne pepper into the cheese sauce with perhaps a bit more vigorous motion than necessary. Bloor's form compressed anxiously. Perhaps I should have mentioned there may have been an incident in the Galactic Senate involving some of that bottled liquid you gave me, the one labeled hot sauce. I froze in the middle of stirring. Bloor, please tell me you didn't take the ghost pepper sauce to a Senate meeting. The ambassador managed to look both apologetic and amused, which is quite a feat for a being with no fixed facial features. In my defense, they insisted on experiencing authentic human diplomacy. The GFSA inspectors were getting closer, their scanners already beeping ominously. I glanced at my spice rack, lovingly stocked with everything from basic black pepper to a carefully smuggled bottle of Dave's Insanity sauce, and wondered if today would finally be the day they managed to classify ketchup as a chemical weapon. Just another normal lunch service at the most dangerous restaurant in the galaxy. The lead inspector's scanner started wailing the moment she stepped into my kitchen. I'd seen Zixie tick before, hard to forget, an 8-foot-tall mantis in a hazmat suit who treats oregano like weapons-grade plutonium. "Chef Morrison?" Her antenna twitched behind her face shield. "Our sensors detected traces of capsaicin from 3 decks away. Care to explain?" "I'm making lunch," I said, gesturing to the buffalo mac and cheese which was now bubbling innocently on the stove. Blor's translucent form jiggled with barely contained amusement from his seat at the counter. The 2 junior inspectors began methodically scanning my kitchen while Zixi consulted her datapad. "According to galactic regulations, Section 47B, Paragraph 9, Zixi said, clicking her mandibles as if relishing the moment. "No food establishment may serve substances with a molecular structure classified as defensive compounds without appropriate warning labels and safety protocols." "It's just hot sauce," I protested. "Humans have been eating it for thousands of years." "Yes." Zixi's mandibles clicked in what I learned was her equivalent of a condescending smile. "The famous human ability to consume cellular degradation agents for pleasure. Tell me, Chef Morrison, are you aware that a single drop of this," she consulted her scanner, "Dave's insanity sauce contains enough capsaicin to incapacitate a medium-sized kraken?" "Really? Only a medium-sized one?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'll have to try it on a large kraken sometime." Zixi's mandibles spread wide, as though horrified. "Your species' cavalier attitude toward biochemical warfare is not amusing." She gestured to one of her subordinates who scuttled toward my pantry. I felt a bead of sweat form on my forehead that had nothing to do with the steam from the cooking. "Pastor. Speaking of storage areas," Ambassador Blor's voice had that particular wobble that meant trouble. "Perhaps now would be a good time to dispose of that package I was holding for you." Too late. The junior inspector's scanner suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree, emitting a shriek that had several nearby diners diving under their tables. "Alert! Alert! Class 7 psychoactive stimulant detected!" Zixi moved faster than I'd ever seen her move before. Her mandibles spread in alarm. "Class 7? That's impossible! Nothing above Class 3 is permitted on civilian stations without—" She stopped dead in her tracks. Compound eyes fixed on the innocent-looking bag the inspector had just pulled from behind my spare flour containers. My carefully hidden, extremely illegal, very expensive stash of coffee beans. "In my defense," I said weakly, "it's really hard to run a restaurant during breakfast hours without caffeine." "Coffee?" Zixi's voice rose to a pitch I hadn't thought possible for an insectoid. "Do you have any idea the last time coffee was legally traded in this sector? 3 solar systems declared war over the distribution rights?" "To be fair," Blor interjected helpfully, "that was mostly due to poor negotiation tactics rather than the coffee itself." Not helping. The station's security alert system chose that moment to kick in, probably triggered by the scanner readings. Red lights began flashing as a calm AI voice announced, "Warning! Restricted substance detected in Food Court Section 7. Please proceed calmly to the nearest decontamination chamber. This is not a drill. Warning, restricted substance." Customers were fleeing in all directions. A group of plutonian gas breathers lit up and evaporated in panic. The only ones who didn't seem concerned were a table of teenage Andromedans who had just discovered the joy of sriracha and were too busy experiencing their first endorphin rush to care about possible contamination. "This establishment is hereby quarantined pending a full investigation," Zixi declared, sealing off my kitchen with projected force fields. "Chef Morrison, you will surrender all Class 3 and above substances for immediate confiscation and disposal." I looked at my spice rack, the product of months of careful collection, trading, and yes, occasional smuggling. Then at my coffee stash, which had cost me 3 months of profits and a slightly illegal favor to a Jovian shipping captain. Finally, at the now cold buffalo mac and cheese that had started this whole mess. "What if I said slowly, an idea forming, could prove that none of these ingredients are actually dangerous, that they're not weapons, just flavor enhancers? Zixie's mandibles clicked skeptically. And how exactly would you propose to demonstrate that? Ambassador Blor's form suddenly brightened with understanding. Oh, this is going to be good. He turned to address Zixie. As a diplomatic representative, I formally request a cultural exchange demonstration under Section 12 of the Galactic Cultural Preservation Act. Chef Morrison has the right to prove that these are traditional cultural items rather than restricted substances. I could practically see Zixie processing this, her compound eyes flickering as she consulted regulatory databases through her neural implants. That would require a formal testing panel and significant safety protocols. I didn't want to think about it, but the word test was sounding awfully close to trial in my mind. And, Blor added, I know just where to find some volunteers. I grinned. You're suggesting we turn this into a dinner party? I raised an eyebrow. A culinary test? Under strict observation? Zixie clicked her mandibles in hesitation. Fine, one rotation, she said, her tone flat. If you cannot prove that these preparations are safe and culturally significant by then, I will personally oversee your deportation back to Earth space and ensure this station undergoes a decontamination to the molecular level. One rotation, I calculated quickly. About 36 hours. 35.7 if we're being precise, Blor corrected. Plenty of time, I said. For a dinner party. As we left the administrative offices, I turned to Blor. I don't suppose those 17 testimonials actually exist. His form rippled with a shrug. They will by the time anyone asks to see them. I have some favors to call in, I muttered, though it would help if Blor could send a few care packages to certain diplomatic offices. I'm sure we can arrange that, Blor said smoothly. Though it would help if you could send some strategically placed items to key decision-makers. Enhance the cultural experience. I shot him a look. You mean bribe them? Blor's form rippled with amusement. I prefer the term cultural appreciation enhancement. The more we spoke about it, the more this dinner party started sounding like an intergalactic disaster waiting to happen. But hey, at least I'd get to show off the full range of human food. We spent the next few hours planning. The entire dinner had to be a showcase of Earth's finest offerings. A balance of spice, flavor, and maybe just a touch of danger. No way in hell I was going to prove human food was safe. What fun would that be? But I needed a menu that could push the limits while keeping at least one species from triggering full-scale evacuation protocols. By the time I started prepping for the meal, it was clear the kitchen was going to look less like a restaurant and more like a high-security government lab. The GFSA had installed enough scanning equipment to analyze a supernova, and every surface was now covered with more warning signs than a plutonium radiation zone. Blor was doing what he did best, running interference. Every time one of the volunteers flinched or got nervous about an ingredient, Blor would absorb it into his gelatinous mass, with a smoothness that was starting to get borderline suspicious. But even he drew the line at testing the ghost pepper sauce. I may be your friend, Chef Morrison, but I'm not suicidal. The real challenge was creating a menu that would showcase the full diversity of human flavor without causing an intergalactic incident. Each dish had to be carefully chosen to prove that we weren't just some biochemical hazard. We were a living, breathing species with a rich, diverse food culture. A food culture that could, potentially, save the galaxy. After several hours of testing, I had a menu that might just do the trick. Dishes that would push the boundaries just enough to prove human food was more than just a weapon of mass destruction, without causing a diplomatic incident. Hopefully. I'll start prepping tomorrow, I told Blor. It'll be fine. I have everything under control. Blor blinked. Well, he didn't blink, but I could tell he was considering something. You might want to rethink your staffing for tomorrow. What do you mean? Some of the volunteers may not survive the experience, Bloor said, as if that were the most normal thing in the world. Did you know the Vexor military now includes curry tolerance as part of their special forces training? I stared at him. Is that a joke? Bloor rippled reassuringly. You'll see tomorrow. Just make sure no one gets too close to the Vindaloo. The clock ticked down, 24 hours to go, and I was in full crisis mode. The kitchen had transformed into a war zone of spices, warning labels, scanners, and security cameras, all while the scent of curry, garlic, and heat wafted through the air. Somewhere in the chaos, Bloor was trying to teach the Andromedans about proper chili pepper consumption, while, ironically, also giving them a crash course in how not to cry after eating a Vexor-approved Vindaloo. I stood at the counter, nervously drumming my fingers. The table of diplomatic volunteers, each one chosen for their cultural significance and tolerance for spice, or lack thereof, was about to arrive. And there was a certain intensity to this dinner party that made my stomach do a little flip. It wasn't just about proving a point anymore, it was about survival. One rotation, I reminded myself. One rotation to show the galaxy that humans weren't just a race of biochemical weapons waiting to happen. We were also, well, a race of biochemical weapons waiting to happen, but with flavor. I turned to Bloor, who was now on his third serving of my special mac and cheese, looking thoroughly pleased. You good? I asked, adjusting the stove's heat. Perfect, he responded. In fact, I'm starting to think you might just pull this off. I raised an eyebrow. Pull it off? My kitchen is practically a classified military zone, and we've got a line of species outside the door who may or may not experience some form of existential crisis when they try my Vindaloo. Bloor chuckled, a rippling sound that was a mix between amusement and genuine fondness. Relax, Jack. You've done this before, just never with quite this level of intergalactic scrutiny. You'll be fine. Famous last words, I muttered, checking the ingredients for the Vindaloo again. Still can't believe I'm making this for an actual diplomat dinner. Bloor waved it off. At least you're not serving something dangerous like wasabi. Remember that little Senate meeting incident? I shuddered, recalling the chaos from a few cycles ago. The Great Wasabi Incident, as it was now called, had left 17 high-ranking officials with gill-based respiratory systems in desperate need of medical attention. The worst part? The universal translator was down, so they couldn't read the "Warning Not for Gill-Breathing Species" label on the bottle. It didn't matter that I had warned them. I'd still ended up on the regulatory watch list for a while. Right. Well, this is just a bit of chicken tikka masala, a touch of Vindaloo, and a side of cautionary misadventures. The kitchen was humming, and I could feel the tension mounting in the air. The volunteers were due to arrive soon, and the last thing I needed was another inspection from the GFSA. I glanced at my spice rack, lined with everything from mild chili powders to smuggled ghost peppers. There was a moment of eerie silence as I pulled the Vindaloo spice mix out and began mixing the paste. I looked up. Bloor had that look on his face again. You've been talking about making this dish for weeks, Jack. You sure you want to risk it? I met his gaze, feeling a strange sense of peace amidst the brewing storm. If they can survive this, then maybe it'll prove we're more than just the dangerous species people think we are. Bloor nodded slowly. Spicy food as diplomacy. This is definitely going down in the history books. Just then, the door to my kitchen swung open, and the volunteers began filing in. General Zor of the Vexor military was the first one to enter, his carapace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He was followed by Lady Crystalline, a representative from the Silicon Consciousness who wasn't quite sure why she was here but felt that the experience was computationally necessary. Then there were a few quantum beings, a couple of energy forms, and an Andromedan who looked like she'd seen a few too many Sriracha bottles. The group was a mishmash of species, all eager to prove their mettle in the kitchen, even if they had no idea what they were getting into. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said with a flourish, "welcome to the Earth Cuisine Challenge. Here you'll be experiencing dishes from my home planet, ranging from mild to, oh my stars, what just happened to my face?" The group nodded in varying degrees of skepticism. General Zor was the most enthusiastic, probably because he still hadn't quite forgiven me for making him cry over curry a week ago. Zixi ticked into the room next, her antennae twitching nervously behind her face shield. She looked like she was ready for the apocalypse. "Everyone take your seats," I said, gesturing to the large table where the dishes would be served. "For our first course, we'll start slow, just a simple garlic bread." The room was immediately filled with wariness. I could see Lady Crystalline's form vibrating slightly, and Zor was eyeing the garlic with the same suspicion one might have when looking at a potentially deadly weapon. "Simple garlic bread?" Zixi's voice was full of doubt. "That doesn't sound like it would—" I cut her off with a raised hand. "Trust me, the heat's coming later." The first course was served, and the atmosphere shifted. The garlic bread was warm, crusty, and glistening with butter. As soon as Lady Crystalline took a bite, her crystalline form lit up. Her sensors whirred excitedly as her eyes fluttered, the equivalent of a human's eyes widening in surprise. "The texture," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "The application of heat has transformed these simple carbohydrates into, oh, my processors. It's incredible." "See?" I said, trying not to grin. "It's all in the heat." General Zor reached for a second piece, but before he could take a bite, Zixi's antennae quivered. "Caution," she warned. This is a Class 2 irritant. We need to test it before—" Zor, in his usual fashion, ignored her warnings and bit in. A moment later, he blinked and slammed his claw onto the table. "I need more water," he bellowed. "What is this? A chemical weapon?" Blore, already on his second helping, turned to me. "This is going to be a long night, isn't it?" I grinned. "You're just getting started. Just wait until the Vindaloo." The tension in the air could have been sliced with a butter knife, if only the butter wasn't already on the garlic bread, which seemed to be causing more existential crises than anticipated. General Zor, now clutching his head and muttering about his mandibles being on fire, was still trying to drink an entire gallon of milk to extinguish the blaze that had erupted inside him. Lady Crystalline was flickering in multiple states of being, her crystalline form vibrating in what I assumed was a state of pure confusion. The quantum beings were warping in and out of existence, as usual, which wasn't unusual for them, but made the entire room feel like it was slowly unraveling at the seams. Zixi, standing in the corner with her datapad, was frantically typing in some kind of emergency protocol. I glanced over at Blore, who was calmly absorbing the entire dish of mac and cheese, again. His translucent form was glowing, which was honestly the best sign I could ask for in this kind of intergalactic culinary mess. "You sure you're good for the Vindaloo?" I asked him. He rippled with a smile. "I've never been more ready." I took a deep breath. Here we go. "All right, folks," I said, clapping my hands to get everyone's attention. "It's time for the main event." I paused dramatically. The Vindaloo. The room fell silent. Every species present had either been horrified or awestruck by the garlic bread, so I could only imagine how they were going to handle this particular monster. "Prepare yourselves," I said, sliding a steaming hot plate onto the center of the table. A wave of spice hit the air like a shock wave, and I saw General Zor's eyes widen in terror. "That," he growled, "smells like a weapon." "Nope," I said, with a grin that could rival any evil genius. "It's just food." Zixi ticked her mandibles nervously. "I'm afraid I must insist that we monitor this dish closely. As per galactic regulation—" "I'm sure it's fine," I said, reaching for my own plate of Vindaloo. I've been making this for centuries, believe it or not. Humans are built for spice. Bloor gave me a knowing look as I took a bite, savoring the rich flavor. It had the perfect balance of heat, depth, and that aggressive kick that only a vindaloo could deliver. I glanced at Zixi, waiting for her reaction. She didn't disappoint. Her antennae flared and her compound eyes dilated in something I could only assume was an approximation of horror. "That is classified as an incendiary device," she said, her voice shaking. "Just wait," I said, reaching for the next bite. I glanced over at General Zor, who was staring at his plate like it was an ancient artifact capable of destroying entire planets. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he muttered, sweating from every possible angle. "You can do this," I encouraged him. "Think of it like a test of will. If you survive, you gain the respect of all the species here. You become a legend." Zor wasn't convinced. He tentatively poked his fork into the vindaloo and took a small bite. The room went silent. And then, "Ah!" Zor screamed, his voice filled with panic and pain. "My mandibles, they're burning!" I watched in amusement as the mighty Vexor warrior flailed, knocking over the chair beside him, which sent a few Andromedans into a panic. Lady Crystalline was doing her best to keep it together, but it wasn't working. The quantum beings were spiraling out of control, their forms oscillating as though they were in the midst of an existential crisis. Bloor casually absorbed another helping of mac and cheese and turned to me. "You sure this is a good idea, Jack?" I waved him off. "Trust me, we're almost there. We need one brave soul to show the others how it's done." Zixi, ever the bureaucrat, was furiously typing on her datapad, probably logging this as a major safety violation in every known galaxy. But she had no idea how much good this was doing. The universe needed to experience human food on the edge of destruction. It was our gift to the cosmos. At that moment, Lady Crystalline, who had been too stunned to react, finally grabbed her fork. With a flicker of determination, she took a bite of the vindaloo. "Wait for it," I whispered. There was a brief silence. Lady Crystalline's crystalline form shimmered for a moment, and then her voice rang out. This is it heaven?" I asked, almost holding my breath. Her form exploded in a cascade of rainbow colors. "I have ascended," she declared. "This is the pinnacle of existence." And with that, she did what only Lady Crystalline could do. She began broadcasting her experience to the entirety of the Silicon consciousness. I stared in awe. "That's what I'm talking about. That's the power of spice." Bloor nodded in approval. "Human food. It's like opening a gateway to the mind, isn't it?" General Zor, now clutching his face and groaning, could only nod weakly. "I think I've seen the face of the universe, and it's burning." I chuckled and motioned to the Andromedans. "Anyone else want to join Lady Crystalline on this spiritual journey?" They stared at me with the intensity of beings who were in the middle of trying to understand the vast mystery of existence, or at least the mysteries of capsaicin. One of the Andromedans tentatively reached for his plate. "Perhaps, if we are to understand humanity, we must first conquer the spice." "Exactly," I said, winking at Bloor. "Conquer the spice, and you conquer the galaxy." Zixi was still frantically typing into her datapad. "We need to stop this now," she said, her antennae twitching. "This is far too dangerous for civilian stations. This is classified as a Class 7 psychoactive stimulant." I held up a hand. "Hold on, Zixi. Not until we've completed the full cultural exchange." She didn't look convinced, but I could see the gears in her head turning. The quantum beings were muttering to each other, and Zor was still recovering from the trauma of the vindaloo. But I knew what I was doing. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was diplomacy. This was proving humanity's place in the galaxy, not just as a species, but as a force of nature, a force to be reckoned with as far as flavor was concerned. As the evening wore on, with everyone recovering from various levels of spice-induced hysteria, the reality of the situation began to sink in. A full 36 hours of testing, explosions of flavor, and a few near-death experiences later, we had officially entered new territory. Human food wasn't just a culinary experience anymore. It was an intergalactic phenomenon. By the end of the night, Zixi, despite her best efforts, was already preparing her report, which I could only assume was going to take several weeks to process. And me? I was cleaning up the kitchen, watching Blore finish his 5th bowl of buffalo mac and cheese, knowing the dinner had accomplished more than just keeping my restaurant from being shut down. It had opened a door. And now the galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath of the Vindaloo debacle was quieter than expected, considering how the evening had started with enough intensity to power an entire city's worth of lights. There were a few diplomatic reports to be filled out, a lot of confused species slowly recovering from their culinary trauma, and an increasing number of social media posts documenting the event in vivid detail. The quantum beings had declared the experience incomprehensible but enlightening. The Andromedans had turned the event into a viral challenge, with species from all corners of the galaxy documenting their attempts at human food and posting the reactions. Blore had already sent me a link to a trending video, "Can You Survive the Human Spice Challenge?" which was rapidly gaining views. Apparently, there was no greater form of cultural exchange than watching someone from a different galaxy burn their taste buds off in the name of diplomacy. General Zor had somehow managed to regain some semblance of dignity. Though he was still occasionally clutching his head and muttering about his mandibles on fire, he'd started training his soldiers to endure human food, proudly declaring, "Only the strong survive," while cradling a bottle of milk. Lady Crystalline had gone on to write an entire dissertation titled "The Ascension Through Spice: Understanding Human Culinary Intensity as a Pathway to Enlightenment." Her paper had been accepted into multiple intergalactic journals, and I couldn't help but wonder if my Vindaloo would one day be studied alongside the works of great philosophers. As for me, well, after a night that involved more near-diplomatic disasters than I'd ever signed up for, I was back in my kitchen, scrubbing down the counter and reflecting on the experience. I could still hear the echoes of the emergency alarms from earlier, the occasional hum of the security cameras that had been installed just in case, and Blore's oddly calm voice saying, "You did it, Jack. You actually pulled it off." I couldn't help but smile. I guess I did. Blore was leaning against the counter, finishing off his 6th bowl of buffalo mac and cheese. "And now, you've earned something bigger than just keeping your restaurant open." He paused, glancing out the window to where a new line of customers was starting to form. "Human food is officially the next big thing in the galaxy. They'll never look at chili the same way again." I raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" "The catch," Blore said, glancing over his shoulder, "is that now you're a cultural icon. And with that comes, well, you know." He gestured vaguely at the growing crowd outside. "Expect a lot more of these." I looked outside and saw a group of plutonian gas breathers entering the food court, their hazmat suits gleaming in the artificial light. They were carrying a bag of what looked like seasoning, probably for a human food experience. It seemed my reputation was starting to spread, and with that came the endless line of customers, aliens who wanted to taste human spice. Even some of the more dangerous species were now attempting to challenge themselves with my dishes, hoping to prove their toughness in the eyes of the galaxy. "Think of it as a business opportunity," Blore continued. "You're going to have to hire more staff." I glanced at my dwindling supply of chairs, several of which were either missing or in pieces, and sighed. "Yeah, I think I'll need sturdier ones for sure." Blore chuckled. "But think about it. You've made human food a symbol of strength, enlightenment, and diplomacy. You've turned your restaurant into the hottest spot in the galaxy." I leaned back and took a deep breath, allowing myself a moment to savor the thought. It was surreal. I had started this whole thing as a simple human trying to make a living in a space station food court. But now, I was running the most dangerous and sought-after restaurant in the entire Nexus station. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I guess I've really made my mark," I muttered, looking at the spice rack now more secure than Fort Knox. "But Blore, do you really think I'm cut out for this? What if I can't keep up with the demand? What if—" "Jack," Blore interrupted with a firm ripple, "you've been doing this your whole life. All you had to do was embrace the chaos. The spice is just a vehicle. What you're really serving is culture, human culture, and that's something the galaxy is starving for." I stared at him for a moment. "You know, you've got a point." He smiled, looking every bit the diplomat that he was, as his translucent form glowed with satisfaction. "You've already proven yourself, my friend. You'll do just fine. And if it gets too overwhelming, well, you always have me to help smooth things over." "I don't think the galaxy's ready for another wasabi incident, though," I joked. Blore shuddered at the memory. "I'd rather not be responsible for another galactic war, but maybe we can try introducing them to wasabi again, in small doses." "Absolutely not," I said quickly, crossing my arms. "Not until I can get the proper hazard warning labels approved." Blore chuckled. "Fair enough. But don't forget, the galaxy's a big place, and right now, human food is the hottest thing around. The question is, Jack, what's next?" I looked out the window again. The line was growing, and the buzz of excitement in the air was palpable. I could feel the energy around me, the energy of something that wasn't just about food anymore. It was about culture, connection, and the power of flavor to bring everyone together, whether they liked it or not. "Well," I said, grabbing a new pot and pulling out some of my more experimental spices, "I think it's time to show the galaxy what human food can really do." And with that, I got to work. The spice rack hummed with the familiar energy of 100 different flavors, each one representing a little piece of human history, culture, and chaos. Human food had officially become an intergalactic experience. And as the line of eager customers grew longer, I knew this was just the beginning.